There's so many different aspects of learning on the instrument of the guitar. There's learning songs, there's learning theoretical stuff, there's learning stylistic nuances, and so on and so forth. So many different things, ladies and gentlemen. But I will say that in terms of like lead guitar stuff, like developing my style, my voice, if you will, on leads, I like to connect the dots. I like to figure, especially like with blues and rock stuff, where did it all come from? Who got what from where? That's kind of how my quest would and continues to go. So for instance, if I heard, Hendrix do something, I'd be like, okay, well, where did he get that from? How much of it is unique to how he put it together versus what did he take from other people? And so I would read about who he was into, and then I would try to connect the dots. So, through really reading about Hendrix and who he was into, it led me to Albert King. But I would still, obviously Muddy Waters and Hubert Sumlin, playing with Howlin' Wolf and B.B. King. But then I'd hear little things that he would do. I'd be like, okay, well, he does this one band. He's trying, and I knew he was into Elmore James, but didn't really play slide all that much, other than that little section on seemingly on All Along the Watchtower, right? Or on Waterfall. So he was kind of emulating Elmore James with those bends and so on and so forth. So anyways, my point is I would go and I try to connect the dots. I'd go back to B.B. King. Well, what did he listen to? And he would mention how, I learned, you could totally hear where his vibrato is reminiscent of Lonnie Johnson and Django. It's got a little bit of that Django sting to it. Then I would kind of listen to a little bit of that Lonnie Johnson, kind of figure, hey, I see where BB got this, and kind of get into it for what that was. Listen to T-Bone Walker. Certainly I listened to Charlie Christian. So I try to, and I would listen to records to try to get the stuff. Sometimes you'd get transcriptions. Like I did have a book of Charlie Christian transcriptions, and that was useful to me because when you're a blues and rock guy, sometimes those chromatic runs or runs that are outside of the normal pentatonic realm are unusual. So you need to have some kind of reference point. So that's where I had a book of transcriptions of the Charlie Christian stuff, and that helped me with that. But most of the nuanced stuff was off records, and I would just listen and go back and forth. And I still, to this day, will kind of need to retune. Because for me, I was just talking with Steve, the owner of Wildwood, earlier today about this, and to me, vibrato and phrasing is the most important thing for me. I'm not saying it's the most important thing ever. No, I'm saying for me, what I like to listen to in a guitar player and what attracts me to the sound of playing the guitar and what I try to emulate is to make sure that the vibratos and phrasing are up to a level that I find satisfying. And that means that I have to constantly tweak it. And sometimes I'll mess around with other people's vibratos just to kind of get in their headspace for a minute. And then there's usually like a gestation period where I'll hear myself playing and I'll be like, yeah, you're trying to do this and trying to do this, and I'll suss it out. But then inevitably I will bring that influence into my stew and cultivate it in a way that I'm trying to do of my own, right? So whether it's, recently I've been listening to a lot of, Peter Green and Danny Kirwan, right? And of course, their vibratos are very reminiscent of, B.B. King, and in Danny Kirwan's space, he liked to listen to some of that old Django and Eddie Lang stuff. So there's even more of a swiftness to his vibrato. And then you'd have guys like Paul Kossoff, who, everyone people are like, Paul Kossoff. Well, Paul Kossoff listened to Peter Green and was trying to do the B.B. King thing, but you got B.B. King, you got Django, Lonnie Johnson. The farther you get away from the source, the more ambiguous it gets, right? So I like to go to source as much as possible so that it keeps the visceral, organic nature of things in the proper perspective. Does that make sense? Sounds weird, but that's what I do. And so I like to go back. I'll sit down and play along with Albert King, Albert Collins, early B.B. King, actually all B.B. King I dig, That's the Cream era Clapton, Bluesbreaker Clapton, early Peter Green, that kind of stuff. Certainly Mike Bloomfield, and Hendrix. Dwayne Allman stuff for the slides. I like Dwayne Allman's playing, period. Dickie Betts. I like to go back to that source stuff, but I will, and then practice some altered dominant stuff and get into all the jazzier things. But to me, as my approach to guitar goes, the farther you get away from, you can pile technique up, but if the genesis of the vibrato and the phrasing and the tone isn't there, all of this is worthless to me. You'll hear a lot of guitar players with amazing technique and so on and so forth, and they do their vibrato and it's like, hey, and that's great for them, but that's not my bag, right? So to me, as long as you got that that vibrato thing happening and so on and so forth, then it's very, very satisfying to listen to and to play and all that other kind of stuff. Does that make sense?